Hi everyone, I'm Miss Mary Beth. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at Ingalls Memorial Library in Rindge, and I'm here today for Armchair Adventures. And that's our series where every day I read a little bit of a book to you, and eventually we finish a whole book together. And the book we're reading right now is Peter Pan and Wendy, and it's written by J.M. Barrie. And this version is illustrated by Michael Foreman. And this book was first published in 1911, and it started out as a play, and then they made it into a novel. And do you know about the story? Have you read it? Have you seen the movie? Well, then maybe you know that it's about Peter Pan, a boy who never grows up, who lives in Neverland, and 3 kids, Wendy, Michael, and John. And so far, the 3 kids live in England, but Peter visits them in the night, and he teaches them how to fly, and together they fly off to Neverland, which is a place that they've dreamed about. We don't know if it's real, but I guess it is because they're all there. And in the last chapter, we met all of the other characters who live in Neverland. So there's the Lost Boys. There are 6 of them, and they're Peter's band of kids that he lives with, and they go on adventures together. And then there are the pirates, led by Captain Hook and Smee. And they're not very nice. Captain Hook is out to get Peter because Peter cut off his hand. And then there are the Native Americans, who Tiger Lily is a girl who's a very tough princess warrior. And then there's some wild beasts, lions and tigers and bears. A lot of characters live on this island. And so when we finished off our last chapter, Wendy was in trouble. She was flying with Tinkerbell, and Tinkerbell's jealous of Wendy. So she brought Wendy over to the Lost Boys. When they were flying, they flew over the Lost Boys, and Tinkerbell shouted, "Peter's telling you to shoot Wendy! Peter's telling you to shoot Wendy!" So the boys did. They trusted Tinkerbell. So let's find out what happens. Chapter 6 is called The Happy Home. Foolish Toodles was standing he's one of the Lost Boys. He was standing like a conqueror over Wendy's body while the other boys sprang, armed, from their trees. "You are too late," he cried proudly. "I have shot the Wendy. Peter will be so pleased with me." Overhead, Tinkerbell shouted, "Silly!" and darted into hiding. The others did not hear her. They had crowded round Wendy, and as they looked, a terrible silence fell upon the wood. If Wendy's heart had been beating, they would have all heard it. Slightly was the first to speak. "This is no bird," he said. "I think it must be a lady." "A lady?" said Toodles, and fell a-trembling. "And we have killed her," said Nibs. They all whipped off their caps. "Now I see," Curly said. "Peter was bringing her to us." He threw himself sorrowfully on the ground. "A lady to take care of us at last," said one of the twins. "And you have killed her." They were sorry for him, but sorrier for themselves, and when he took a step nearer, they turned away from him. Toodles' face was very white, but there was a dignity about him that had never been there before. "I did it," he said, reflecting. "When ladies used to come to me in dreams, I said, 'Pretty mother, pretty mother.' But when at last she came, I shot her." He moved slowly away. "Don't go," the other boys called in pity. "I must," he answered. "I'm so afraid of Peter." It was at this tragic moment that they heard a sound which made the heart of every one of them rise into his mouth. They heard Peter crow. "Peter!" they cried, for it was always thus that he signaled his return, with a crow. "Hide her!" they whispered, and they gathered hastily around Wendy. But Toodles stood aloft. Again came that ringing crow, and Peter dropped in front of them. "Greetings, boys!" he cried, and mechanically they saluted, and then again there was silence. Peter frowned. "I'm back! Why do you not cheer?" They opened their mouths, but the cheers would not come. He overlooked it in his haste to tell the glorious tidings. "Great news, boys!" he cried. "I have at last brought a mother for you all!" Still no sound, except a little thud from Toodles as he dropped on his knees. "Have you not seen her?" said Peter, becoming troubled. "She flew this way." "Oh, me," one voice said, and another said, "Oh, mournful day." Toodles rose. "Peter," he said, "I will show you to her." And when the others would have still hidden her, he said, "Back, twins, let Peter see." So they all stood back, and they let him see, and after he had looked for a little time, he did not know what to do next. "She is dead," he said uncomfortably. "Perhaps she is frightened at being dead." He thought of hopping off in a comic sort of way till he was out of sight of her, and then never going near the spot any more. They would all have been glad to follow if Peter had done this. But there was the arrow. He took it from her heart, and he faced his band of bent boys. "Whose arrow?" he demanded sternly. "Mine, Peter," said Toodles on his knees. "Oh, dastardly hand," Peter said, and he raised the arrow to use it as a dagger. Toodles did not flinch. He bared his chest. "Strike, Peter," he said firmly. "Strike true." Guess he felt like he deserved it. Twice did Peter raise the arrow, and twice did his hand fall. "I cannot strike," he said. "There is something that stays my hand." All of them looked at him in wonder, save Nibs, who fortunately looked at Wendy. "It is she," he cried. "The Wendy lady. See her arm!" Wonderful to relate, Wendy had raised her arm. Nibbles bent over and whispered reverently. I think she said, "Poor Toodles." "She lives," Peter said. Sighing, slightly cried instantly, "The Wendy lady lives!" Peter knelt beside her and found his button. You remember, she had put it on a chain that she wore around her neck. "You see, the arrow struck against this. This was the kiss I gave her. It has saved her life." So the arrow hit the button and it didn't go into her. That's great. "I remember kisses," Slightly imposed quickly. "Let me see it." "Hey, that's a kiss." "Is it really a kiss?" Peter did not hear him. He was begging Wendy to get better quickly so he could show her the mermaids. Of course she could not answer yet, being still in a frightful faint. But from overhead came a wailing note. "Listen to Tink," said Curly. "She's crying because the Wendy lives." Then they had to tell Peter of Tink's crime, and almost never had they seen him look so stern. "Listen, Tinker Bell," he cried. "I am your friend no more. Begone from me, forever." She flew on his shoulder and pleaded, but he brushed her off. Not until Wendy again raised her arm did he relent sufficiently to say, "Well, not forever, but for a whole week." Do you think Tinker Bell was grateful to Wendy for raising her arm? Oh dear, no! Never wanted to pinch her so much. Fairies indeed are strange, and Peter, who understood them best, often cuffed them. But what to do with Wendy in her present delicate state of health? "Let us carry her down into the house," Curly suggested. "Eh," said Slightly. "That is what one does with ladies." "No, no," said Peter. "You must not touch her. It would not be sufficiently respectful." "That," said Slightly, "is what I was thinking." "But if she lies here," Toodles said, "she will die." "Aye, she will die," Slightly admitted, "but there is no way out." "Yes, there is," cried Peter. "Let us build a little house around her." They were all delighted. "Quick," he ordered them, "bring me each of you the best of what we have. Gut our house. Be sharp." In a moment they were busy as tailors the night before a wedding. They scurried this way and that, down for bedding, up for firewood, and while they were at it, who should appear but John and Michael? As they dragged along the ground, they fell asleep standing, stopped, woke up, moved another step, and slept again. "John, John," Michael would cry, "wake up! Where's Nana? Where's Nana, John, and Mother?" And then John would rub his eyes and mutter, "It is true, we did fly." You may be sure that they were very relieved to find Peter. "Hello, Peter," they said. "Hello," replied Peter amicably, though he had quite forgotten them. He was very busy at the moment, measuring Wendy with his feet to see how large a house she would need. Of course he meant to leave room for chairs and a table. John and Michael watched him. "Is Wendy asleep?" they asked. "Yes," he said. "John," Michael proposed, "let us wake her and get her to make supper for us." But as he said it, some of the other boys rushed on, carrying branches for the building of the house. "Look at them," he cried. "Curly," said Peter in his most captainy voice, "see that these boys help in building of the house." "Aye, aye, sir." "Build a house!" exclaimed John. "For the Wendy," said Curly. "For Wendy?" said John. "Why, she's only a girl." "That," explained Curly, "is why we are her servants." "You? Wendy's servants?" "Yes," said Peter, "and you also. Away with them." The astounded brothers were dragged away to hack and hew and carry. "Chairs and a fender first," Peter ordered. "Then we shall build the house round them." "Aye," said Slightly. "That is how a house is built. It all comes back to me." Peter thought of everything. "Slightly," he ordered, "fetch a doctor." "Aye, aye," said Slightly at once, and disappeared, scratching his head. But he knew Peter must be obeyed. Do you think there's a doctor in Neverland? So he returned in a moment, wearing John's hat and looking solemn. "Please, sir," said Peter, going to him, "are you a doctor?" The difference between him and the other boys at such a time was that they knew it was make-believe, while to Peter, make-believe and true were exactly the same thing. This sometimes troubled them, as when they had to make-believe that they had their dinners. If they broke down in their make-believe, he rapped them on the knuckles. "Yes, my little man," anxiously replied Slightly, who had chapped knuckles. "Please, sir," Peter explained, "a lady lies very still." She was lying at their feet, but Slightly had the sense not to see her. "Tut, tut, tut," he said. "Where does she lie?" "In yonder glade," said Peter. "I will put a glass thing in her mouth," said Slightly, and he made believe to do it, and Peter waited. It was an anxious moment when the glass thing was withdrawn. "How is she?" inquired Peter. "Tut, tut, tut," said Slightly. "This has cured her." "I'm glad!" Peter cried. "I will call again in the evening," Slightly said. "Give her beef tea out of a cup with a spout to it." But after he had returned the hat to John and blew big breaths, which was his habit on escaping from a difficulty. In the meantime, the wood had been alive with the sound of axes. Almost everything needed for a cozy dwelling already lay at Wendy's feet. "If only we knew," said one, "the kind of house that she likes best." "Peter!" shouted another. "She's moving in her sleep." "Her mouth opens!" cried a third, looking respectfully into it. "Oh, lovely!" "Perhaps she's going to sing in her sleep." "Wendy, sing the kind of house you would like to have." Immediately, without opening her eyes, Wendy began to sing. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest ever seen, with funny little red walls, and a roof of mossy green." They gurgled with joy at this, for by the greatest good luck, the branches they had brought were sticky with red sap, and all the ground was carpeted with moss. As they rattled up the little house, they broke into song themselves. "We've built the little walls and roof and made a lovely door, so tell us, Mother Wendy, what are you wanting more?" To this she answered rather greedily, "Oh, really, next I think I'll have gay windows all about, with roses peeping in, you know, and babies peeping out." With a blow of fist they made windows, and large yellow leaves were the blinds. But roses... "Roses!" cried Peter sternly. Quickly they made believe to grow the loveliest roses up the walls. "Babies? To prevent Peter ordering babies, they hurried into song again. "We've made the roses peeping out, and babes are at the door. We cannot make ourselves, you know, 'cause we've been made before." Peter, seeing this to be a good idea, at once pretended that it was his own. The house was quite beautiful, and no doubt Wendy was very cozy within, though of course they could no longer see her. Peter strode up and down, ordering finishing touches. Nothing escaped his eagle eye. Just when it seemed absolutely finished, "There's no knocker on the door," he said. They were very ashamed, but Toodles gave the sole of his shoe, and it made an excellent knocker. "Absolutely finished now," they thought. "Not a bit of it." "There's no chimney," Peter said. "We must have a chimney." "It certainly does need a chimney," said John importantly. This gave Peter an idea. He snatched the hat off John's head, knocked out the bottom, and put the hat on the roof. The little house was so pleased to have such a capital chimney that, as if to say thank you, smoke immediately began to come out of the hat. Now really and truly it was finished. Nothing remained to do but to knock. "All look your best," Peter warned them. "First impressions are awfully important." He was glad no one asked him what first impressions are. They were all too busy looking their best. Peter knocked politely, and now the wood was as still as the children, not a sound to be heard except from Tinker Bell, who was watching from a branch and openly sneering at them. What the boys were wondering was, would anyone answer the knock? If a lady, what would she be like? The door opened and a lady came out. It was Wendy. They all whipped off their hats. She looked properly surprised, and this was just how they had hoped she would look. "Where am I?" she said. Of course, Slightly was the first to get his word in. "Wendy, lady," he said rapidly, "for you we built this house." "Oh, say you're pleased," cried Nibs. "Lovely, darling house," Wendy said, and they were the very words they had hoped she would say. "We are your children," cried the twins. Then they all went on their knees, holding out their arms, and cried, "Oh, Wendy, lady, be our mother." "Oughtn't I?" said Wendy, all shining. "Of course it's frightfully fascinating, but you see I'm only a little girl. I have no real experience." "That doesn't matter," said Peter, as if he were the only person present who knew all about it, though he was really the one who knew least. "What we need is just a nice motherly person." "Oh dear," said Wendy. "You see, I feel that is exactly what I am." It is, they all cried. "We saw it at once." "Very well," she said. "I will do my best. Come inside at once. You naughty children, I'm sure your feet are damp. And before I put you to bed, I have just enough time to finish the story of Cinderella." In they went. I don't know how there was room for them, but you can squeeze very tight in Neverland. And there was the first of the many joyous evenings they had with Wendy. By and by she tucked them up in the great bed in the home under the trees, but she herself slept that night in the little house, and Peter kept watch outside with drawn sword, for the pirates could be heard carousing far away, and the wolves were on the prowl. The little house looked so cozy and safe in the darkness, with the bright light showing them through its blinds, and the chimney smoking beautifully, and Peter standing on guard. After a time he fell asleep, and some unsteady fairies had to climb over him on their way home. Any of the other boys obstructing the fairy path at night would have been mischiefs, but they just tweaked Peter's nose and passed on. And that is the end of chapter 6. What do you think? Are you glad? I'm so glad that Wendy's alive, that she was okay. She was saved by Peter's button kiss. That's great. And I like that the Lost Boys tried to help her and they built her a nice little house. I think she's happy. Thanks for reading that with me. It's a silly story, isn't it? I'm glad we're reading it together. So, have you signed up for your summer reading program? Do you have your own READSquared account? If you do, you can type in the code word and win a raffle ticket. Have a raffle ticket to try and win a prize for every single Armchair adventure we do. So the code word for today is alligator. Did you get it? Okay, good. Go to your READSquared account and log it in. And let me know and I'll give you a raffle ticket. Thanks for reading with me, you guys. Tomorrow join me for chapter 7. Have a fun day.